Alarm bells are absolutely ringing right now across the globe. A bombshell-leaked Pentagon email reportedly explores ways to actively punish European allies like Spain and the United Kingdom. And honestly, that immediately begs a massive question. Is the US actually preparing to abandon Europe?
You know, when asked point blank by Reuters about withdrawing the US from NATO, the president's response was chillingly simple. He just said, "Wouldn't you if you were me?" This isn't just background noise anymore. These are direct statements that are forcing military strategists to completely rethink global defense.
So, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to objectively map out the facts surrounding this potential massive shift in global security. We'll be relying entirely on raw data and intelligence reports to understand exactly what's happening between the US and Europe right now, and more importantly, what it means for our world. To make sense of all this, we're going to break it down into 5 quick parts: the European status quo, the new geopolitical crisis, and then 3 distinct reasons for potential withdrawal: growing tensions, the abandonment play, and finally, the track record. Let's jump right in. Okay, part 1, the European status quo. To really understand the stakes of a withdrawal, we first have to anchor ourselves in the sheer scale of the current military reality. We're talking about a status quo that has essentially held global stability together since the end of the Second World War. 35,000. That's how many US personnel are currently stationed just in Germany alone. The US has tens of thousands of troops spread out across dozens of bases throughout Europe, forming the absolute backbone of the continent's security architecture. It's a massive footprint. And get this, 16,000 of those personnel are at southwestern Germany's Ramstein Air Base. This isn't just any regular base, it's the primary US Air Force hub in Europe and a vital control center for drone operations. So pulling the plug on this infrastructure wouldn't just be some localized event, it would send a logistical shockwave through the entire Western military apparatus. Moving to part 2, a new geopolitical crisis. The crucial point here is that this long-standing status quo has been rapidly, and I mean severely, disrupted since January 2025. The escalation has been literally blistering. Just tracing this timeline, within weeks of the new term, the US suspended military aid to Ukraine. By June, immense pressure led NATO members to agree to a staggering 5% of GDP defense spending target. Then, in early 2026, the unprecedented Greenland crisis erupted. The US demanded this semi-autonomous Arctic territory from Denmark, who, by the way, is a fellow NATO member, even suggesting military force was on the table. A founding NATO member threatening to attack another? Which brings us to part 3, the first of our 3 reasons for a potential withdrawal: growing tensions, specifically regarding the Iran conflict. The friction between these allies is undeniable right now. European governments have been highly reluctant to join the conflict. Spain and Italy outright denied the US permission to use bases on their territories to attack Iran. And the United Kingdom? They initially refused as well, before eventually only allowing heavily restricted access. Well, this refusal led directly to that leaked Pentagon email we mentioned at the start. Top Pentagon advisor Elbridge Colby reportedly floated some extreme measures to deal with this, kicking Spain out of NATO entirely and deliberately reviewing the US policy regarding the UK's claim to the Falkland Islands. It's a calculated, honestly breathtaking strategy to punish allies for non-compliance. And the frustration isn't just hiding in leaked emails, it is highly public. On Truth Social, claims were repeated that NATO wasn't there for the US when needed, which is striking, considering NATO's Article 5 has only ever been invoked once in history, and that was by the US after 9/11. The Post then ominously referenced the Greenland dispute, rather bluntly calling it that big, poorly wrung piece of ice. The public messaging is clearly laying the groundwork for a serious rift. Let's move to part 4, our second reason, the abandonment play. Experts suggest this might not just be about anger over Iran, but rather a highly calculated tactic. An EU Institute for Security Studies report actually maps out 2 potential paths for this. First, a tit-for-tat scenario, essentially a high-stakes bluff, threatening abandonment simply to squeeze Europe into spending more on their own defense. Second, actual abandonment, a genuine geographical pivot, where US military assets are permanently moved away from Europe over to the Americas or the Indo-Pacific. But wait, there's a third, highly strategic scenario to consider here: symbolic abandonment. Reports indicate the war on Iran is dragging down US approval ratings, right? So, the administration might be seeking a quick political victory. If the US partially pulls out, causing a panicking Europe to beg for help, it frames the US as dominant and Europe as subordinate. It basically manufactures a massive political win out of thin air. And finally, part 5, reason number 3, track record.
This is why analysts are taking this so seriously. The current administration simply won't stop talking about leaving, and crucially, they have the history to back it up. Thinking back to the administration's first term, they pulled the U.S. out of major, historically significant international agreements and organizations. We're talking the Paris Climate Accord, the UN Human Rights Council, UNESCO, and the World Health Organization. Leaving established global pacts is a proven core part of their playbook.
But check out this number, 66. In the current term alone, the administration has withdrawn from 66 international agreements, including 31 UN bodies. That is a massive, aggressive scale-up from the first term. It makes it entirely reasonable for analysts to assume NATO could simply be the next organization on the chopping block.
To top it all off, a Reuters report highlighted that the U.S. has actually set a hard deadline of 2027 for a, quote, European-led NATO. Analysts point to this specific date as undeniable evidence that the groundwork is already being systematically laid for an eventual U.S. exit. It's not just tough talk anymore. There is a ticking clock.
As we start to wrap up this explainer, it's really important to point out that observers are totally split on the ultimate motive here. Supporters argue this is a brilliant 5D chess policy designed to finally force Europe to take responsibility for its own defense. Critics, on the other hand, argue that publicly threatening allies and speeding up the alliance's collapse doesn't make anyone safer, and that the primary goal is simply to humiliate Europe.
Ultimately, whether this is a strategic bluff, a search for a quick political victory, or an imminent permanent reality, the data points to a massive geopolitical earthquake. If the ultimate security blanket of the last 80 years is pulled away, we have to ask ourselves, what does a world with a fundamentally shattered NATO actually look like? And who steps in to fill the void?